One of the biggest mistakes I see people make in rental property ownership is failing to screen tenants properly, either not doing it at all or doing it insufficiently. And so today I want to talk about some tips for screening your prospective tenants before you let them into your rental property. My name is John Williams and I'm the owner of Rent My Home Property Management. We are a property management company based in Clarksville, Tennessee. We manage long-term unfurnished rentals, so about 12-month leases, single-family homes, small multifamily homes, and we manage everything from about Clarksville, Tennessee all the way down to Nashville, pretty much about an hour either direction, an hour drive. And so primarily focusing on Middle Tennessee long-term rental properties. That's our management company. So great rental property ownership starts with great tenant screening. Think about the risks associated with rental property ownership. There's only a couple of things that can really put you way underwater or cost you a lot of money. There's lots of little things, but there's only a few major things. One of the major things that could go wrong, everyone already knows, is an eviction and what comes along with an eviction. Oftentimes, tenant malicious damage or tenant destruction of property, that can kind of coincide or come along with evictions. And so I kind of bundle those together. And so first, if you know that evictions and tenant damage, excessive tenant damage that comes along with evictions, if you know that that's one of the biggest risks associated with rental property ownership, then it would be wise of you to say, okay, how could I minimize that risk or combat that risk prior to getting started in rental property ownership? You don't want to be asking that question after the fact and figuring this out the hard way later, because you can learn it on the front end and avoid some big costly mistakes. And really avoiding these costly mistakes or minimizing your chances of these things happening, it begins with quality tenant screening. And so when you're listing your property for rent and you're beginning to screen applicants for your properties, you should have a documented process laid out beforehand that you commit to following prior to even posting your property for rent. The first reason why is because if you have a documented process that you're going to follow, it's going to force you to treat everyone fairly. The real estate industry in general, your highest chances of being sued are in the property management industry. I think it's just because it's contentious with tenants and owners. There's a lot of ways to get sued. So bottom line is that fair housing is important. It's especially relevant in property management. And so you want to have a screening process that ensures you treat everyone fairly and you follow it. And so step number one, get a clear screening process that ensures you're in compliance with fair housing laws and stick to it and treat everyone fairly. That's a great place to start. But you're going to need this regardless, because when you post your property for rent and you begin to screen applicants, you want to set your emotions aside and stick to the criteria that you come up with and set out initially that you've predetermined is going to be a good fit for your property, that is within your level of risk tolerance, etc. And so again, before even posting your property for rent, you need to think about, okay, what income levels am I comfortable with? What credit scores am I comfortable with? Do I even care about credit scores? Do I care about debt to income? Do I care about previous evictions? If so, how long ago? Do I care about bankruptcies? Think about all these different criteria that you're going to use to evaluate your prospective tenants and write it down in, checklist format or however you want to do it. And so that way, when someone applies, you could pull up your criteria that you thought about without emotion, logically. You planned out your risk and said, okay, I'd be comfortable with someone that meets these criteria. And then when those prospective tenants apply, you could pull that up and see if they meet your qualifications or not. I lay out that picture because a lot of times where people go wrong is they say they want to give someone a chance. And I put that in quotes because what you're saying when you want to give someone a chance, which is great, I'm all for that, give people a helping hand if you can. But I put it in quotes because what you're saying when you say that is, I'm going to put this person in my property, I'm going to rent my property to them, although they don't meet the criteria that I set out initially. It's emotions playing into it, whether that person has some kind of a story that pulls on your heartstrings, or maybe they just say that they're going to give you more rent than what you're even asking for. Maybe they can move in sooner. Maybe there's something motivating you to get them to sign on the dotted line, get them to sign a lease, but they didn't meet your criteria. That's probably the most common reason people go wrong, is because they want to give people a chance. There's 1,000 ways to give people a chance, but by putting someone in your property that isn't qualified, you're not really doing them a favor, and you certainly aren't doing yourself a favor. If it's going to increase the chance of an eviction, you have to throw them out eventually, whatever the cause is. Bottom line is, if they're not qualified, you're not really helping them by getting them to sign a lease for your property. And so you want them to be qualified. So always set your emotions aside, stick to your criteria. Now, what are the ideal criteria? There's so many different things you could screen for. I'll just share what we do at Rent My Home Property Management. Hopefully you find some of it helpful. Take some, use it in your own process, build your own process, whatever, use ours. There's no right or wrong answer per se. Again, it's just a matter of setting those criteria up and sticking to them. And so one thing we do look for is credit. Of course, that's important to us. And so we actually do a range of credit scores. So when someone applies, assuming they meet all of our other criteria, if they have a credit score of a 680 or above, they usually can get approved with a 1 month security deposit on one of our properties. Now, for those folks who have a 600 credit score to a 679, we consider that kind of the mid-range, and we'll still consider them, but they're likely going to have an increased deposit. So that's kind of how we handle that. And again, that just goes to show you that you can be a little bit creative here. You don't have to have hard and fast lines. You can do kind of structured ranges or be creative, have contingencies in your process as well. So we break up the credit score kind of by ranges there. Income. We actually look at both gross monthly income and debt to income. We want the gross monthly income to be 2.5 times the monthly rental rate, and we want their debt to income to be below 40%. And so we want them to make sufficient income. Just because they make a lot of income doesn't mean they don't also have a lot of debt. That's why we also screen for debt payments, because you could have someone who on paper makes a ton of money and they look like very well qualified, but then you pull up their credit report and they have outstanding loans for tons of different things. That's why we think it's also important to factor in debt to income as well. So we actually look at both of those things, because we want to make sure whoever we put in our properties are really well qualified. Now, how do you go about verifying income? There's a number of different ways and tools out there, but obviously you don't want to just take somebody's word for it. You want to ask for documentation, and this should be part of your screening criteria. What documentation is acceptable to you? We actually like to look at pay stubs and bank statements. It's important to know that actually rental fraud is on the rise, and so what I mean by that is that increasingly over time, especially recently, prospective tenants across the nation are actually altering their documents using AI or just technology, Photoshop, to make it seem that they're qualified for a rental property when they're not. And so if you're not doing this professionally, if you're not doing this hundreds of times a week, if you're not screening, thousands of applicants, you may not easily catch some of these things, but someone could submit a pay stub that says I make, $100,000 a year, whatever, $10,000 a month, but it's simply altered or it's just fake. It's created online. Same thing with their bank statements, and there's technology even to match fake bank statements to fake pay stubs and create fake both of them to show fake deposits, fake income. And so you have to have the tools in your tool belt to kind of look for those things, look for those red flags, analyze those documents and make sure they're legitimate, because you should know that that's on the rise. And so it's not enough for someone to say they make the income. You have to take additional steps to verify that it's actually true. So we actually look at their pay stubs and bank statements, cross-reference them to make sure they're accurate in alignment, and use other tools to ensure that they're actually authentic. Now, you could get in the weeds a little bit about folks who are self-employed or maybe folks who are coming in from a different state. You need to have tools in place to verify their income as well. Someone who's coming in from out of state and has a job offer, is that going to be acceptable to you? Because obviously they're not going to have pay stubs at their new job. So yeah, the self-employed folks, you actually have to understand how to review tax returns, because you don't want to discriminate against them just because they're self-employed, but you do want to make sure they make sufficient income. And so are you going to look at 1 year's tax returns, 2 years tax returns? Are you going to look at their current year? If you're doing that, you have to understand, how to read a profit and loss statement and make sure that they're profitable, and you're not just looking at their gross income, for example, if they're doing some sort of sales. You got to really understand their bottom line to make sure you know how much they're bringing home. So there's a lot of nuance there when it comes to evaluating income. It's really not as simple as just saying oh, tenant says they make, $10,000 a month and moving forward. There's a lot that goes into verified income. I'll say another piece on identity verification. Just like people are taking pay stubs and bank statements and creating fraudulent documents, they're doing the same thing with identities. And we've actually seen this before where someone will apply under a specific identity and provide an ID, but the information on that ID was altered. This isn't uncommon. And so they're actually not who they say they are. So therefore they're not making the income they say they are. They don't have the credit they say they are. They actually stole someone's identity and they're using that to apply for a rental property. So again, with the ID, you have to make sure it's authentic. Look for red flags on that. Meet them in person, hold up their ID to their face, do a selfie verification, and make sure that it's not altered in any way and they're actually who they say they are. Another big one for us is the landlord reference. We consider our screening process to be very thorough and kind of airtight. Part of the reason why is because we go through the extra step of getting that landlord reference. Yes, sometimes it does take some extra time to bug that previous landlord or current landlord and ask for that reference. Sometimes it takes a couple days and it can be frustrating, but it's such an important piece of the screening puzzle because you want to be very thorough and you want to have a whole picture of a prospective renter before they get into your property. Again, your goal here is to minimize the risk of eviction and tenant malicious damage, which can be tens of thousands of dollars. And so it's so important to do as much and thorough work as you can on the front end with the hopes that you're going to be able to avoid these problems down the road. And a good thorough screening process can do that for you. And so after you verified income, after you verify identification, go through the extra step and get that landlord reference. It's definitely worth it. Usually if they check all the other boxes, it's going to be fine. We've certainly seen instances where it's not. And so that's why we always take the time to get that landlord reference. It's such an important piece of the puzzle. You could, for example, have someone who has a decent credit score, you verified their income, their identity checks out, they are who they say they are, but guess what? They've had a recent turn of events in their life and maybe they lost their job, or maybe they're getting a divorce, they're in a fight with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they're getting evicted from their current rental property. The rest of the picture isn't going to tell you that. They make the income, they got a good credit, they haven't been evicted yet, credit's fine for now. The eviction's not showing on the credit report, but if you didn't get that landlord reference, you wouldn't know that they're facing an eviction and they stopped paying rent 2 months ago. That's a very important piece of the puzzle, because the last thing you want to do is place that person in your property who's obviously not going to be paying rent. So we talked about credit, we talked about income, we talked about identification, we talked about landlord reference, and we talked a little bit about rental fraud. Those are just a few pieces to our screening process. Again, just to recap, whatever your screening process is, think about it beforehand. Make sure it's very thorough and well thought out. Set your emotions aside and think clearly and say, okay, what is my risk tolerance? What kind of prospective renters am I comfortable renting to prior to you hitting the market and searching for tenants? Before your emotions kick in and have a chance to influence you, set those criteria up and stick to them when you do begin to search for your tenants. If you do so, you're definitely going to minimize your chances of ever having an eviction and minimize your chance of having any excessive tenant damage, that kind of stuff that comes along with evictions. And so I hope that was helpful for you. Again, my name is John with Rent My Home Property Management. We are a property management company based in Clarksville, Tennessee. If you guys have any questions about our screening process, maybe you want some tips on your screening process, we'd love to give you our thoughts. Give us a shout anytime. You can check us out at TennesseeManager.com.